Okay, today I want to talk about a topic that often gets swept under the rug, but it's hugely impactful on your journey in investing in Ghana. That is the ticking time bomb that is the leasehold tenure system. Okay, so I've always struggled to get my head around kind of the leasehold tenure. Coming from UK, US, UK, we always kind of avoid leasehold tenure. But for in Ghana, it's so commonplace, it's technically unavoidable. So let's understand a little bit around the basics of the leasehold tenure. As a Ghanaian, you can get leasehold typically up to 99 years, but there's no statutory cap. So it depends on what you negotiate with the landowner. For foreigners, you are constitutionally restricted to 50 years. You cannot own a freehold property or freehold land in Ghana. Now, this is the key part. Renewal isn't just a foregone conclusion, it's not guaranteed. Leaseholders must approach landlords and negotiate their renewal term. So there is no automatic right unless it's written into the original lease. Now, this can have a number of consequences, and some of them I'm going to tell you about personal stories that I've heard around end of term issue. Now, customary ownership is focused around stall lands or traditional system. Customary ownership dominates lands. So this is by the stalls, the chiefs, etc. Around 80% of lands is under the customary system. The remaining is government land, which in turn can have its own issues itself, and I'll talk to those shortly. Now, the end of lease reality, which don't let anybody fool you any otherwise, is that at the end of that lease, unless stated in the original agreement, that land goes back to the owner. Renewal is not guaranteed, and leaseholders must approach landowners to renegotiate. No automatic right unless it's written in the original lease, like I said. So when you reach that point, some common challenges emerge. High renewal fees. I've got some crazy examples of that. Okay, so story number one. I speak a lot with my elders because they're the most experienced in this country around land issues and land scenarios. One of my elders had a plot of land from which he bought from family or family members who owned the land. They had indenture. This land was bought for a certain amount. Let's say, for argument's sake, it was $30,000. It was in a prime area back in the early 90s. And that elder of mine went on to build a commercial space on there and was very happy because it sprung up as a commercial hub. Now, that was great. But when he tried to get the title changed to his name, he encountered the understanding that it had already been sold by the family members to the state. This is one of the kind of 20% pieces of land where the state owns. And effectively, this was a common scenario in which other family members, the state agreeing the purchase or transfer of the land, other family members were going around and selling the land because they didn't feel like they got their cut from the state purchase, which kind of it's frustrating, but it's quite common. So what happened was the state was receiving so many instances of this that they decided to regularize because they couldn't go around and just knock down everybody's buildings that had been there for a certain amount of time, years. What they had to do is accept the fact that, okay, you guys are on there now, but in order to regularize or get the title, you have to pay a fee. Now, on paying that fee, that lease would be renewed up to 99 years. So remember, this elder of mine paid $40,000. And then I'm not sure what the timing was. It could have been like late 2010s. In order to renew, you're supposed to get preferential treatment as a Ghanaian native. So your renewal cost would be lower. But he was quoted 11.2 million US dollars, not cities, to renew this land. Now, eventually that came way down nearer to the $300,000 mark to renew that land. And he was successful in doing that, getting the title, etc. But this goes to show that upon the ending of a term, that's the end. It goes back to the owner unless you specifically state in your term that you get automatic right to renewal. And even when you do get automatic right to renewal, you are renewing based on current market prices. And current market prices, as we all know, aren't really transparent. If you would like to understand a little bit more about land and pricing, you can always use Kuro. Kuro there, you can see the median and maximum prices, the price trends over time. You can understand about the infrastructure projects in the area that could help your land appreciate. Yeah, and you can toggle between different currencies to understand what it would be in a Western currency versus city. Try it out. At least you'll be well informed in terms of pricing, and you can take into account what you would have to pay in the future, potentially, or what you would negotiate to pay in the future regarding the renewal, which I'm sure you'll have to pass down to your kids or your grandkids. I have another story, which I'm not sure if I should tell. No, I'm not going to tell that one. But that's kind of the challenges that you will face. I personally also was looking around for property, new developments, etc. And one particular development, I was told that the lease was 85 years, to which my natural question was, what happens at the end of the 85 years? And they said, oh, don't worry, we'll be here to assist you. I'm not going to be here to be assisted. 85 years from now, if a miracle happens, I'm not going to be here. You're not going to be here. Who is we? So there is like this kind of general ambiguity. And I think a lot of what's happening right now is Ghanaians in the system who are clued up on the tenure system and just clued up on the system in general are expecting some sort of reform to come in play. Now, the customary length of term is 99 years, but it's up to the landowner. There's no cap per se on it for Ghanaians. For foreigners, there is a cap. But even then, people negotiate outside of that cap. But legally, you aren't entitled to anything more than 50 as a foreigner. As a Ghanaian, you are entitled to 99 and more, whatever you negotiate, but it's customary to receive 99 years. So that's a little bit of story around this land tenure system. So common challenges, high renewal fees, as I've just explained, demand based on inflated land prices, especially in and around Accra. Some landowners just straight up refuse to renew. What you're going to do in that sense, in that case, there may be opportunities for them to sell on to somebody else. So if you've got your house sitting on there for 99 years, that could come down. I have learned that, even the foreigners that come in are well understood on the fact that they may have only 50 years to run their businesses or whatever on this land, but they intend to make the necessary income to justify that 50 years before either handing it over or being ready to pay the right amount. Funnily enough, very wealthy foreigners, it's not really a deterrent. They may find their ways around the system, etc. But constitutionally, foreigners are only allowed 50 years. You are at risk of completely new conditions, shorter terms, higher fees. It's really at the discretion of the landowner. And if you don't have a renewal clause, you have zero leverage. So you're effectively a leaseholder, you must have a renewal clause in your tenure. You could risk losing your home, your business, anything, your land, without any compensation. So there has been some legislative updates to the land tenure situation. In 2020, the Land Act was updated, but there was still a lot of legal gaps that were emerging in this Land Act. The Act lacks specific guidance around what happens towards the end of the tenures and terms for lease renewals, such as duration, premiums that could be charged, ground rents that could be charged, and ground rent calculation. This omission allows the people leasing the land, the real landlords, to impose arbitrary pricing, exorbitant renewal terms like the 11.2 million, leading to inconsistencies and potential exploitation of the leaser. What the Act does do well is reference automatic renewal provisions for Ghanaians. However, it comes under a certain condition and it doesn't clearly define the process or the criteria for such renewals, which can lead to disputes, especially when landowners contest the automatic renewal claims. There is even more limited protection under non-Ghanaian leases. They're not entitled to automatic lease renewals unless specifically stated in the lease agreement, so you'd have to negotiate it in. Without that explicit renewal clause, non-Ghanaians risk losing their leasehold upon expiration, and there is a risk and issue around the lack of the actual enforcement mechanisms for these automatic renewals. The Act doesn't establish robust mechanisms or robust measures and procedures to enable fair practice in the lease renewals. The rights of the person leasing can be exploited by the person leasing to them with that lack of enforcement, and enables them to impose unfavorable terms and deny renewals without just cause. So you have to really position yourself in a very defensive and guarded position when it comes to establishing the terms of the lease. I mentioned there were specific conditions for automatic renewal to be applied for Ghanaians, and those conditions can be very heavily disputed. Condition 1 is the leasee is indigenous to the customary land. So the conditions that include for that indigenous leasee would be residential purposes or crops, commercial or industrial. The duration of the renewal is for the same duration of the original lease, and the leasee must have discharged the customary duties to the leasehold. So when it comes to non-indigenous Ghanaians leasing on that customary land, the Act implies a right to lease renewal unless the lease expressly states otherwise. For non-Ghanaians who are not indigenous to the area, the Act implies a right to renewal, but doesn't explicitly state it. When it comes to public land, leases on public land, when the Republic grants that lease, that's into the state, to a Ghanaian citizen, the lease is subject to automatic renewal upon expiration with certain exceptions. Exception 1 is that the lease is used for a commercial property. Exception 2, if the leased property is required for redevelopment. Some practical considerations. While the Act provides for automatic renewal under specific conditions, practical challenges may arise. Negotiation of the term. The Act does not specify the terms of the renewal, leaving room for negotiation which can lead to disputes. Dispute resolution. If parties cannot agree on the renewal terms, the matter may be resolved through alternative dispute resolution mechanisms or failing that through the courts. And we know how much activity goes through the courts. Look, in summary, no, let me not get there yet. So look, despite this doesn't seem to be a deterrent for a lot of people to invest in Ghanaian real estate and land. What it shows is that you have to be watertight in getting your automatic renewal, making sure that's ironclad, being able to negotiate the terms or the calculations of that renewal, the terms and the calculations of any ground rent that's paid and things of that nature. Otherwise, you can be left stranded in the future, or your generations to come may be left stranded or not able to foot the bill. I've heard of a story of a family member who a property in Kumasi, it was Kumasi, and it was a property, a shop. And at the end of the lease, the government just took it back because that family member couldn't keep up or couldn't pay the renewal price that they were quoting. So be ironclad, be very, very diligent about what leases you are signing, the term, the renewal term, the calculations, have that all agreed and signed off before you enter that space. All right, that's all I got to say for now. This isn't to fearmonger or anything like that. It's more just educate-led. You know, my platform thrives on interest in Ghanaian real estate, but it also has a fundamental principle of transparency in Ghanaian real estate. Know what you're going into. If you are a Ghanaian in the diaspora, you have favorable terms. Stop being asleep over there and leverage those favorable terms. That's it for now. Until next time, take care, stay safe.